Welcome to ImageMaker Media. I'm Joyce Knudsen, founder of the ImageMaker Incorporated. Dr. Misner is back for a second interview about his new book, Business Networking and Sex, Not What You Think. Now that I have your attention, let's welcome Dr. Ivan Misner to the show. Nice to have you back, Ivan.
Hey, thank you. It's great to be back on the show.
First, I'd like to recommend your book to anyone who is networking, that is, if they want to get more business.
Thanks. It was a fun book to do. My co-authors were amazing contributors to this book.
I watched the video and it looks like you had a lot of fun with each other.
We did. We absolutely did.
Well, that's what makes something really worthwhile. Well, Ivan, I have two questions for you to start out with. First, has all this technology that we have today affected the way people communicate in a person-to-person communication? And second, have gender differences changed over time in the approach to networking one-on-one in the business world?
Well, I think technology has definitely changed the way we communicate. I don't know how it's changed. I'd have to give some thought to how it's changed in terms of gender relations. We're working on possibly doing a follow-up book on online networking and the sexes. But I'll tell you how it's changed in general. I think that technology has flattened the communication hierarchy in connecting with people. I can't possibly imagine running a global organization. I'm the founder of an organization called BNI, and we have over 6,500 groups in 55 countries. I can't imagine running this organization without the technology that exists. I think it's enabled us to do that because we can communicate with each other via the internet, email, websites, and I have members. I have 160,000 members. They can communicate with me directly via my blog site, my podcast, the various places I have on the internet. Well, 29 years ago, that wasn't remotely possible. And that's where technology has really come into play. If it's done right, technology can be an effective tool for building your network.
I definitely think a book would be in order for that because we've learned to say things in less than 140 characters, and I have over 500,000 people that I have to interact with that are actually interacting, and there's quite a few that do. It surprises me. So I definitely would have you on again for a book about the technology.
All right. Well, I'm talking to my co-authors now, and we're definitely considering it. It's a long process to do what we did because we interviewed 12,000 people.
Sure.
And that alone took 3 years to do, and then writing the book was another 1.5 to 2 years. So it's a pretty long process. We won't be on next month.
No, I don't think it will be. Well, Ivan, please tell the listeners about the importance of learning about gender differences from your book. Will the book help them to interact more effectively?
No doubt about it. When you understand how to work effectively with the opposite gender, you literally can double your market. And what we were finding was that men and women were not communicating from a business perspective. They weren't communicating effectively with one another. And, we all know this from John Gray's Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. We know that from a personal relationship perspective. But I was actually a little bit surprised at how we kind of crosstalk in a business situation when I saw the survey results and the comments. It just it amazed me how different men and women are even in a business context.
Well, I think men and women they're different in general. Having been married 45 years, I know I'm still learning things about my husband and the way men react to things. So it's really a great service for them each of us to understand each other, men and women.
Yeah, you want to hear the biggest surprises for you? My big epiphany
yes.
in this book was, and it's not in the bigger scheme of things a big thing, but it was just a total surprise to me, was women commented that when men introduce themselves, it's like a resume. And this is what they say: men brag about who they are and what they do.
Yes,
and
they do.
And then they say it's like a resume. So,
yes.
I'm the vice president of marketing. I supervise X number of people. We generate, X number of revenue. And they say it's like bragging. Now, I run the world's largest face-to-face network. I've been doing this for almost 30 years.
Yes, you have.
That just blew me away. I was like, oh, my gosh, I'm guilty of that.
Well, and I think women are guilty of talking too much.
Well, that's the other, yes, and about things that men don't perceive. Now, I'm not saying it's true, but they perceive it to be true, that women don't take their business seriously because they talk about things that have nothing to do with business. For example, this is what they communicated. I love doing what I do because it really gives me an opportunity to spend time with my family and my children. And
right.
And of course, guys, you can just see a guy listening to that. His eyes roll up behind his eye sockets, and he's like, just kill me now, put me out of my misery.
Right.
And they don't take women seriously. Let me tell you, guys listening to the show, women take their business seriously. They just go about it in a different way. And when you survey 12,000 people, you see those patterns, and that's one of them.
Definitely, and I think that women perceive bragging as negative, so you stopped getting their attention.
Exactly. That's exactly correct. And when women, are frustrated by that kind of behavior, and the men are frustrated by what they see with women in introducing themselves, and if we could just learn how to be more receptive to that other style, or better yet, if we are capable of altering our style. And there's some easy ways to do that. And what I find funny is if we're talking about behavioral style, forget about gender, drive, influence, steadiness, compliance, like a distance system, nobody gets upset with that because that makes sense. If I can learn how to talk to a high D personality more effectively, that makes sense. But when you start talking about if I can learn how to talk to a woman in a business context more effectively, people start getting nervous about that. Like there's something wrong. There's nothing wrong with that. And you don't have to be, if you're a man, you don't have to be a woman to be able to communicate effectively.
I hope not.
No, I mean, nobody ever suggested that in the survey, but people feel that, well, I am who I am, and I'm going to be what I am.
People don't like change, and I think it's such a simple solution. Men stop bragging, women stop talking too much.
Yeah, certainly about things that aren't business related. Now here's what I saw for a couple of recommendations, and I think it's very effective. One woman said, I can always, the conversation is much different with a woman. Oftentimes they'll say something like, oh, how did you hear about tonight's event? And she'll say, oh, well, Sally invited me. Sally, oh, you know Sally. I know Sally. How do you know Sally? There's a guy standing there, and again, their eyes are rolling behind their head.
Oh, my gosh, even my eyes are rolling, and I'm a woman.
But actually, that's a great way to make a connection with somebody. If you're a guy, rather than stand and do the resume, ask, so how did you hear about tonight's event? It's a relational approach to networking, which, by the way, women tended to be much more relational in their networking based on the results of this book, and men tended to be much more transactional. Get right to the business, do the transaction.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
We call premature solicitation, which you don't want to say fast 3 times.
No, I don't think so. As a master image professional myself, I know the importance of dressing professionally, not only during a networking event, but for sure in any business situation. In fact, I tell clients to dress professionally when they go out for groceries. In your first chapter, you speak to this. Please elaborate.
Yeah, so we had a lot of women complain about men's behavior at networking events, and we had a lot of men complain about the way women dressed. They dressed provocatively. Okay, so actually no men really complained, but they did comment. Nobody would really complain, but they did comment that women dressed.
Well, they can't concentrate if all they're looking at is your boobs. They're not going to be hearing what you have to say.
Yeah, well, those, as Hazel likes to call it, the weapons of mass distraction have to be put away.
I love that.
And so now here's what we thought was interesting, because my co-authors and I have been to hundreds, if not thousands, of networking events, and we have seen that most men behave very professionally at networking events, and most women dress very professionally at networking events. But it's those handful of men that behave badly, and those handful of women, I mean literally 2% of the women and the men in the audience, those 2% of the women who dress like they're going out to a nightclub, that's what men and women are talking about. And we call that the exception becomes the perception. It's that exception, those handful of people who behave badly or dress provocatively, that become the perception of the gender. And ladies, that's that's who we're talking about. That's the guys are talking about the women who are dressed provocatively, and the women are talking about the guys who are behaving badly.
I'm wondering if those women that are dressing poorly are just there to find a man.
I think sometimes that might be the case. I didn't see that a lot in the survey. What I saw were women who acknowledged that they dressed provocatively as a way of getting the opposite sex's attention to get their business. So it was a great way to stand out in a crowd, so to speak. And of course, there were a lot of women who complained about that. I mean, women probably complained about women's dress more than men did.
I can see that. I know I would have been one of those people. Well, in your study discussed in our last interview, it was discovered that women spend less time and get better results in networking.
Yeah.
Tell us about the study, and why do you think this happens?
Well, we surveyed 12,000 people from every populated continent in the world. It was not just a survey of BNI members. It was open to the public. And we did, in fact, find that women spent just a little bit less time in their networking efforts than men did, and they actually generated a higher percentage of their business through their networking efforts. And so, I tell men, let's review. The ladies are spending less time in generating more business through networking. We definitely need to do something different as men. If we want to generate more business. The one thing that the women were doing that men did not was that they focused more. They were more likely to focus on relationships. They were very relational in their networking, where the men tended to be transactional. Now, if you pull gender out of that and you just look at the question relating to relationships versus transactions, the people, men and women both, who were relational in their networking tended to do much better than the people who tended to be transactional, taking gender out of it. The thing is, women were more likely to take that relational approach than the transactional approach, than men did.
But don't you think that has to do with them being mothers and wives and daughters and sisters and just having to focus on relationships all the time, and then they add that extra little element of being a businesswoman as well? Don't you think that's just sort of a built-in factor in women?
I don't know if it's genetic. I don't know if it's upbringing. That's the big question always.
Another book for you.
Another book.
Yeah.
I think that whatever the reason, it's the reality. It's the reality that I saw in this survey, and again, in some ways, it's the reality that I've seen in my own life. I mean, I'll give you a great example. In one of the interviews that I was talking to somebody, this wasn't part of the survey, but we did many interviews, and I asked one woman about her, building professional relationships, and she just mentioned off the cuff that, well, she has a lot of professional relationships. She has a really good relationship with her dry cleaner. And I said, "You have a relationship with your dry cleaner?" He said, "Yeah, of course." I said, "Describe that for me, because I want to wrap my head around this. What kind of business relationship do you have besides, taking your dry cleaning there?" She said, "Well, I've gotten to know the wife really well there, and we share recipes. She's from one. My friend is from one ethnicity, and the dry cleaner is another ethnicity and a different culture, and so they share recipes from, their ethnic recipes with each other."
Yeah.
I said, "Okay, what else?" She said, "Well, I've just gotten to know the family real well. I went to their kids' birthday parties a couple of times, and when their husband was really ill, I went down and saw him in the hospital, and I'm like, well, that sounds like a real relationship." So I told my wife that I had kind of tested. I asked men and women over the next 6 months, "Do you have a relationship with your dry cleaner?" And I'd say 70% of the women that I spoke to said they did, and 5% of the men said, "Yeah, I have a relationship with my dry cleaner." So I told my wife, I said, "I'm going to try something out tonight in a speech." She said, "What?" "I'm going to ask the audience. I'm going to say, 'Men, how many of you have a relationship with your dry cleaner?' Raise your hand."
That's
I
funny.
said, well, it gets even better, because I said
Yes.
5% of the audience will raise their hand. She
Yes.
said, "Okay." And then I'm going to ask the ladies, "How many of you have a relationship with your dry cleaner?" And I said, "I predict that 70% of the audience will raise their hand." And she looked at me and said, "Oh, honey, I don't think I'd do that." And I said, why? She said, well, I don't have a relationship with Richard and Diane. I know they want to travel to the Middle East, but Richard's really afraid to fly, and they've got these two cute little dogs that are just so adorable. I've seen pictures of and I know Diane was walking. They deliver clothes to our house, so they drop off the dry cleaning. I know Diane was walking up the street, and she tripped and fell and really hurt her leg, and, oh, maybe I do have a relationship. And I looked at my wife, Beth, and I said, now I've known these dry cleaners for years. I said, Richard, Diane, is that the name of our dry cleaners? So here I am, one of the world's leading experts on networking, but I'm also a guy. And to me, that was a transactional relationship. To her, that was a relational relationship in business. And that, to me, was another of the big epiphanies that, men really have to work at this to build the relational approach to networking. It comes more naturally, or I don't know if it's genetic or if it's upbringing, but women do it better.
Well, I do think that's a great story because in my own life, I form relationships wherever I go, be it at the country club, be it at the dry cleaner, be it at the store, and everybody knows me by name, even though I'm not from a small town. And you never know who those people know, and that's a form of networking, wouldn't you say, Ivan?
I absolutely would, and I see that in my wife, and it comes very natural to her. Whereas it's something that I really have to turn on and off. If I want to do it, I got to turn it on. My son always cringes because wherever my wife goes, she strikes up conversations.
That's
with people.
me.
She comes out of the restroom and she has a new best friend, and my
That's
son,
right.
Really, Mom, really?
Well, these people trust you, and if you have something that they want, they'll ask you about it. They'll say, well, gee, I've talked to you all this time, and every time I see you look the way I'd like to look, how can I look that way? Well, then they're asking me for business.
Right. Yep,
but I think men need to learn that, but women need to learn how to shut up. They just talk too much. I really think so.
Or talk about sometimes the wrong thing from a male perspective.
Mm-hmm.
They're talking about things that men don't think are relevant to the business.
Right.
For whatever reason, they feel that the business, they're not taking their business seriously. Hazel gave a cosmetics consultant some great advice. Hazel's my co-author in the book.
Okay.
And she gave a cosmetics consultant some great advice.
Mm-hmm.
And the advice was, she heard her, introducing herself to a guy, and it was, I love doing this cosmetics business because it gives me time with my family and blah, blah, blah. So she said, look, this is why men aren't taking you seriously. Here's what you want to say the next time you meet a guy. I run the sales division for a cosmetics company. I have 45 women who work for me, and we generated about $12 million in revenues last year. She said, You say that to a guy, you now have his attention.
Yes, you gave him facts.
Yep, he gave him facts.
They want the bottom line. They want those facts.
Right. That's right. Now start to talk, and you can build that relationship, and now you got their attention.
That was excellent advice, by the way. Very excellent. Being in the image field myself and doing a little bit about what Hazel does, I can tell you that is an excellent way of wording it.
I was impressed, and that's what I now recommend to women when they're introducing themselves to men. And to men, I recommend that you try to make a connection, in an appropriate way, of course, a relational connection when you're talking to a woman as opposed to doing the resume.
Absolutely. Well, on the Today Show, and congratulations on being on the Today Show, you talked about women being more relational and collaborative, and you talked about that a little bit before, but can you elaborate more?
Yeah, we asked a question of the 12,000 people, asking them, what did you look for first? What do you look for first when you're networking? Do you want to build that relationship, or do you want to do the business transaction? Do you want to do the business transaction and then build the relationship later? And women were more likely to say relationship first, transaction second, than men were, and were a little less likely to do that. And so, and that's the big factor that, in fact, we looked at with gender out of it, and anyone who was relational tended to do better. But that kind of makes sense when you really think about it. Networking is it's all about relationships. It's not about the transaction. A good friend of mine who wrote a book on social capital and success and social capital, Dr. Wayne Baker, he says, he calls this coin-operated networking. Transactional networking is coin-operated networking. I'm going to put the coin in, give me the candy. Transaction, right?
Yes.
It's not. Yes. There's no relationship.
Right.
And I think that's a brilliant metaphor.
It is.
people are looking for the transaction. You know, they put the coin in, they want the result right now. And that's not a good way to build a personal network. And
like a 2-year-old. I want it now.
Yeah.
And we have to grow up, and we have to learn the right way of going about doing things.
We do, and I think and men aren't the only ones. Women do it, but men do it more. They're driven to the purpose. The purpose of networking is business. Therefore, I'm going to meet people, shake hands, and do business. And that transactional approach doesn't work out in the long run. Even to some extent, even with men, when it starts off well. But the truth is, you're not going to get business from people until they trust you. And so that trust comes through the relationship building. So if you don't take it to that next step, even with a man dealing with a man, if you don't take it to that trust and that relationship, you're not going to get the business.
Well, I think the more we talk, the more I'm swaying toward genetics being a big part of this, because there's not been a study yet, and that'll be another book. But I do think that women are just nurturers, and nurturing form relationships where you can't just put a coin in and get a baby out. You have to have the relationship first with the baby, and then later on in life, if you haven't given that baby, the relationship is. I know we're talking about babies versus business and networking, but there's definitely a correlation, because you have to form a relationship with anybody, even a baby, in order for you to get what you want back from them. Am I off the track here?
No, I'm inclined to agree with you. I think that the way we are raised impacts that and solidifies that. But I'm inclined to agree that it is to some extent really nature and the difference between men and women from the very beginning. I mean, you look at my wife and I. I've been trained to do this. I've written 17 books on this.
We train our men.
Well, I know how to network, but I fall back into my male behavior style sometimes, and I have to be conscious not to do that. And I think that's part of the issue of nature that you're talking about.
Absolutely, nature versus nurture. Well, do some men and women still judge each other business-wise based on their gender? And if so, why hasn't this changed?
I think men and women definitely judge themselves based on their gender. Ironically, I think women judge women by their gender more than men judge men.
I agree.
Boy, it came up in the survey. Women were just as hard on women as men were on women. As a matter of fact, I think men were not nearly as hard on women.
I think it's an envy factor. I think some women are better looking than other women, and other women don't like it, so they don't want to network with them. This has been my experience.
Yeah, I think you're probably right, and there are definitely, some of the old stereotypes are quite alive and well, and that's really where the perception becomes, the exception becomes the perception comes in. People hang out. What do you talk about? You talk about stuff that, is controversial. And so, the men behaving badly and the women dressing provocatively, that's controversial. You don't say, oh, I just met this wonderful person and we're going to be doing business and it was a great conversation and I really liked them. No, you say, wow, did you see the way that woman's dressed? And
that's,
or did you see how badly that guy's behaving? He's hitting on every woman. That's what people just kind of naturally gravitate to in conversation. And I think that's why that exception becomes the perception of a gender, which is really all about stereotypes.
Well, there's actually, in the image field, there's a saying people use is, what you wear speaks so loudly, I can't hear what you say.
Right.
And it is, where men will be men. They like women. They like to look at women. And women will be women. They want to, some of them want to show off what they have. It just isn't going to work in the business networking arena, do you think?
No, but I think, and I might be surprised if you don't agree, that women can dress very femininely, be very attractive, and still be very professional.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely.
It's when women tend to dress. They don't tend to do it, but when women dress like they're going to a nightclub, that's where it probably crosses the line in a networking environment. Now, sometimes women will say, yeah, but what about men? Well, you know what? Men dress badly too, but it's usually not the same kind of badly. It's
not provocatively.
They
just don't have they haven't gone to an image consultant and learned how to dress.
Yeah.
Or had a wife to help them.
That's absolutely right. Or they may just, be doing it, just outright wrong. I'm giving an example of somebody that I met was a CPA, and he called himself the casual accountant, and he wanted people to know that accountants were, they weren't staid and all conservative and in three-piece suits. And I thought the concept was interesting, but he dressed in a Hawaiian shirt, shorts, and sandals.
Oh, no. Every time I see a guy in shorts, I don't know if you wear them, so if I'm not upsetting you, but every time I see a guy over 30 in shorts, I say to myself, don't they know that they can see somebody out there that's going to see them next month at a networking event, and they're showing their legs, which are not even that great? Maybe if you're a weightlifter and you look fantastic and you want to show it off, but to me, that's no different than a woman showing off what she's got.
Well, if you're on your own time and you're not at a business meeting, who am I to say? But when you go to a business meeting and you're wearing shorts, and then you say, "I'm looking for corporate clients,"
right?
Thinking to this guy, not a chance would I ever refer this person to a corporate client.
And why don't they get that? I don't understand.
Don't know. Some will, some won't.
That's true. Well, here's the question. Do you think that men and women prepare equally for a networking event? Do you think men prepare more than women or vice versa?
I'd be inclined to think that women prepare more, and I'll give you another example.
Okay.
I had one woman say to me, she reads the sports page every day. And I said, Susan, you don't like sports. You dislike sports.
But men do.
Yeah, that's it. And she said, when I strike up a conversation, there's a group of men and they're talking about sports. If I don't chime in, I'm left out.
It's brilliant.
Completely left out. So she says, I read the sports page every day so that I can have some information. Now, here's my question for you. You ever seen a guy read Cosmos so we could have a conversation?
I have not.
No. Or home.
But maybe he should. Maybe he should to get involved in these conversations with women at the beginning of the networking process. Possibly,
but my point is that women, I think, are more likely to prepare than the guys are. And I think you're probably right. Reading some content that, is of interest to women would be a great way of striking up a conversation, because the women are doing it more than the men from what I've observed.
And getting the sale, because if the men think that women went to that trouble, or vice versa, I think that is, for example, I read 5 newspapers a day. So you've got the Wall Street Journal, you've got one School of Thought, you go to the New York Times, you go to the various Investors Business Daily. I'm not an investor, but I know men are. So I want to know what they're looking at.
Right.
And so whatever comes up in a networking event, I really don't do them anymore because I work online and not in person. But I think in person it's very important for people to prepare for talking to both genders.
I think you're right, and I think Google is a wonderful thing because there's going to be a particular person at an event. Mm-hmm. I always Google
read about them.
Background information, so that I get in there with a little bit of knowledge.
Right, just for this interview, I had to listen to videos and read blogs and try to read your book. I don't read books because of my vision. I have to read e-books because it's too small print. But I find a way to get your information in my head because it's very valuable information, and what you're doing is an amazing thing for people. They just don't know it, so we're going to make them know it after this conversation. Do you think that women networking with men is more effective than women networking with women? We answered that already because it seems like women have more trouble networking with women.
Well, listen, there were a lot of women who said, I love working with women. They understand me. They understand my business well. But there were also a lot of women who said they don't like working with women because they're not direct. They don't get to the point.
Right.
And we just didn't have that with men. I don't think out of the 12,000, I don't think I got one comment of, I don't like, from a man, I don't like working with men. Not one.
Right.
We got a fair number from women. I think it certainly depends on the individual, but women seem to have a little harder time working with women based on their own comments than the men
and
have.
Perceptions they have about that woman. A lot of times they say, well, I thought she was all bad. Well, what gave you that impression?
Right.
It's a perception, and as we know, perception could be reality. So that's why I thought that question might be a good one. I'm curious, Ivan, what motivated you to start Business Network International? Such a brilliant idea. I still remember coming to the Nashville area from living in Detroit for 25 years and from Cleveland for 25 years. I still remember each time I moved, the first thing I did was join a BNI meeting. And because it's amazing what you did, what motivated you to do this?
Well, I'd like to tell you that I had this vision of an international organization. We now have 6,500 groups in 55 countries. But the truth is I needed some referrals for my friends and my consulting practice. And so I put together one group with the idea that we would refer business to each other. And someone came to that very first group in about the second month and asked if I would help her. It was a woman. She did basically secretarial service. And she asked if I would help her open up a second group. And I said, no, this isn't what I do. I'm a business consultant. My doctoral work's in organizational behavior, and I work with small companies and, hiring, training employees. And she said, well, this is sort of consulting. It would help me, build my business. And she talked me into it. I opened up the second group. And it was all part of my consulting practice. And we had 25 people come to the first meeting of the second group, but 2 couldn't join because we only take 1 person per profession. And both of them asked me, hey, would you help me open up my own group? And I said, no, this isn't what I do.
One thing led to another.
Yeah. And, they talked me into it. I opened up those 2 groups. We ended up opening 20 groups the first year by accident.
Wow.
And it was at that point that I think I got the vision that this was much bigger than I expected.
Yes.
We don't teach this in colleges and universities anywhere in the world.
Not at all.
We don't teach networking, referral marketing, social capital, emotional intelligence. And I realized that I had struck this chord with the business community that I didn't anticipate. I mean, I was a fairly young man. I was 28 years old. And I thought, and everybody, by the way, everyone I invited to BNI was older than me and more successful than me.
But that's what you do. You want to be around the more successful people.
That's right, and they were older, they were more mature, and I thought they had this referral thing all worked out because they were pretty successful and they were older than I was. What I discovered was almost no one has this referral thing worked out, and that they were looking for the answers as well, and they were looking for the answers because we don't teach it in colleges and universities. And so that's when I sat down and really created the vision of this being a much larger organization, and the fact that there had to be educational components to the system in order for it to be replicable and scalable. And it's pretty scalable now with 6,500 groups around the world.
Well, congratulations to you for that. I always say to people that I train, don't be an opportunist, but always keep your eye open for opportunity.
Yeah.
And you saw an opportunity to do something different than what you originally were doing, and little did you know. I mean, I just find it amazing. You've been in business since 1985, and I'm sure people have admired your business model, yet you still remain number 1 in your field. How do you motivate yourself every day to continue with this type of success year after year after year?
That's a really good question. I think you have to well, I don't know about others because everyone's got their own style of doing business. For me, I had to reinvent myself a couple of times. When you're starting a business, it's a very entrepreneurial enterprise.
Yeah.
And you're wearing all the hats. I mean, I read a book by a friend of mine, Michael Gerber, and, one of the things that he recommends, The E-Myth is the book, The Entrepreneurial Myth.
I have that, yes.
Yeah, it's a good book. He's a very interesting man, Michael, and I've gotten to know him in the last few years. One of the things he recommends is, create an organization chart, even if it's only you and one other person. Create an organization chart of where you're going to be in 5 or 10 years, and just fill all the boxes with your name in all the boxes if it has to be, and the other person. And that's what I did. I had 15 boxes, and my 2 part-time employees that added up to 1 employee were in 3 or 4 of the boxes, and I was in 11 or 12 of the boxes. And my goal was over the next 5 to 10 years to scratch my name out of all the boxes but 1 and just have this one focus. And, by the time I hit it was probably 7 years. I had filled all the boxes, but then I discovered there were a few other roles that I hadn't thought of.
Sure.
I was still in too many boxes. So my goal was to kind of reinvent myself, to let go of the things that I wasn't excited by. I think when an entrepreneur is either working in their flame or they're working in their wax.
I like that.
When they're working in their flame, they're energized, they're excited, they're doing the things they're interested in, they're looking forward to going into the office. When they're working in their wax, it just saps them of energy. It takes away their excitement for the business.
Right, the passion.
Yeah, it takes it away. And so what I've tried to do several times in my career is to create the organization in a way that allows me to work in my flame more than in my wax. And when you own the business, sometimes you get dragged back into the wax. And I'm a little bit there now, but I hope to be back fully in my flame and working on the business next year, and
definitely
achieve what I shoot for.
I definitely think writing something down tends to make it more real.
Yeah.
Because to me, it's your word to yourself that in 5 years you'll do this, in 10 years you'll do that. I did it with a visual component, and everybody said I'd never do it. And you don't listen to other people. You listen to yourself, and you reinvent different ways of learning, different ways that you could be more passionate about your business. And I'll die at my computer. I love what I do because I do write down, and I put myself in all those boxes, and somehow I feel like I have to keep my word to what I put down. Does that make any sense?
It absolutely makes sense to me, and I think that most business people are so busy working in the business that they forget about setting that vision and putting it out there and making it public, and then doing everything they can to strive towards that. See, what we're doing right now, you and I,
yes.
On this show, this is my flame. This is what I love doing. I love doing interviews. I love speaking to members. I love going to events and talking to members more and more with technology. I do live webcams. I did a webcam in Midland, Odessa, Texas this morning.
Wow, that's a tongue twister.
And it's mostly desert, but I did a live webcam from my house first thing in the morning in Midland. That's the kind of stuff that's my flame. I love being able to talk to members, do interviews, and that's really, when I'm doing that, I'm at my best.
Well, your interviews are so informational and so well said. Thank you, Dr. Ivan Misner, for your time once again to educate our listeners.
Thank you. I love being on your show. Happy to come back anytime.
And you're
you have
welcome.
Great questions, and you obviously do your research. Not all interviewers do, trust me.
Well, I'm a successful businesswoman, and I've learned how and what it takes to stay in business for 30 years. So that's one of the reasons. But you have been a pleasure. What I admire so much about you before we get off of the call is that you are willing to share even though you are number one in your field. And you never got to be, quote, unquote, all that. And neither have I. And I think we share that in common.
Someone once said to me, a humble person doesn't think less of themselves. They just think of themselves less. And I love that.
Interesting.
I try to live that.
I love that's wonderful. If Dan could put that in an email for me, I would really like to remember that one. Well, thank you so much. Really, thank you so much for your time. And you do educate our listeners, and for that I'm grateful.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.